Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. This is a different kind of talk. I gave a talk previously about product management. That's what I usually talk about. This relates, but it is kind of a different twist, and it's a little bit more of a story. So bear with me. And the title of it is Stone Soup. The kind of subtitle of it is how trying ridiculously hard on things that fail can produce pretty amazing results. So hello, I'm John. You can quote me on that. I am a partner and a product manager at Thunk. We make custom software. I think everyone here knows that. We build a custom software using Laravel mostly for clients. You should hire us. We're great. And we're very product-minded. We like hard, gnarly projects that are not so straightforward because we like doing some product management in there as well. You may know, sorry, we don't use this website anymore. You might know me from Blue Sky. Wow, that's pixelated. And the thing that you might not have noticed in my bio that I put everywhere is I also make games. So I love to make games. I've been making them for years, and that's what I'm actually here to talk about today. So before getting into the games, I was going to see, have you guys heard the story of Stone Soup? This old kind of European folk tale. There's a lot of different origins of it.
Yep.
The bullet points are basically, so this villager, this traveler is walking through this village and he's looking for a good hot meal. And he says, is there any food around here? And everyone says, buzz off. And so he goes down to the river and he fills a pot with water and he puts a big stone into it and just starts boiling it. And somebody walks by and says, what are you doing here? He says, I'm making stone soup. If you want to throw in some carrots, you can have some of my stone soup. And the guy obliges, and someone else walks by and says, what are you doing? He says, we're making stone soup. If you have some lamb you want to put into the soup, you can put it in. People start adding, herbs and potatoes and all sorts of good stuff. And they sit there for hours, and the whole village is gathered around. And at the end of the night, he pulls the stone out of the soup, and he says, let's eat. So that's the story of stone soup. So let's go back to 2018. In 2018, you can meet Walter. Walter is my good buddy. He was a product designer at Dropbox at the time, and we were in the Bay Area. I was a product manager, and he was a product designer, and we started making games. We had no idea what we were doing, and we just started testing games all the time. We were literally just pushing pieces of cardboard and Post-its around tables with words on them, and sometimes it was fun, a lot of times it was not fun. It was very creative and exciting, and we were just constantly pulling people in. If you interacted with me during this time of life, there's 100% chance that I said, hey, will you sit down and try this board game with me? And it was, a disaster, but it was great. We learned a lot, and we learned how to build stuff. And it was a really, really fun time. We reached 2020, and we can't do this anymore. We can't meet up in person, and all of this kind of in-person stuff we were doing with board games no longer works. We have to try something new. At the time, I started developing a card game called Colossi, and I was like, this is really exciting. I can try to sort of test with people online using this software, tabletop simulator, but it's just not that fulfilling. We need something kind of fresh and interesting. So this is Survivor. We were watching lots and lots of Survivor. During the pandemic, I, like a lot of people, became completely infatuated with this show, which is like corny reality TV, but it is also secretly a brilliant game. And it gave me this real respect for social games, which are terribly interesting. In a normal game like chess, the thing that you're playing off of is the rules, the hard mechanics of the game, and the kind of just intellect of your opponent and how much they know. In a social game, the materials that you're actually dealing with are often a simpler rule set, but you're playing off of people who are able to lie and cheat and steal, and you need to build a coalition, which is really hard to do in a game where people are trying to screw you over. And I started to realize, I was like, man, social games are super interesting. So I sent out a message on Discord to a bunch of my friends, and I basically just said, look, I've got this half-baked idea for a game that we play over the internet, and it takes a week to play. And it's a social game that's just sort of asynchronous and always on, and there's lots of opportunities to kind of screw with each other and lie and have fun, and we'll play the whole thing over Discord. And people jump in. We start testing it. We realize really quickly that it's when you play a game like this over the internet, there's a lot of lying and there's a lot of back and forth, and since we did it all in Discord, it's always on, and there's like new drama unfolding throughout the day. And sometimes you wake up and like a whole episode of stuff happened in the server while you weren't even watching, and you're like, oh no, I gotta scramble and change my vote. And it was really, really fun. We'll go through just some of the things that came up throughout this game. People showed up, our friends all showed up. Like, we kept on inviting more and more people because it was COVID, and it was like we wanted something to do. People started showing up and realizing that they could really bend the rules of this game in really funny and interesting ways. For example, faking screenshots. In a game that takes place over the internet, where people are lying all the time, screenshots are everything. And sometimes their screenshots are really convincing, sometimes they're less convincing. Like this one, we had this idea that every time someone makes a big move in the game, we would announce it publicly. So somebody played Sabotage, and then everyone would be like reacting to it, and everybody be, the drama of the game was unfolding in the channel, and it was totally hilarious. And like every day, very, very funny, ridiculous things were happening in the channel. My sister jumped in and played, and she had a crazy wall. I think at one point there was like yarn tying together different things where she was trying to figure out hidden information in the game. Jacob Davis, who now works with us at Thunk, at one point realized that he couldn't win the game, and he actually sold his votes for real money. There was another point where, building trust with people, which is like an important thing you have to do to win the game because you have to collaborate, is really, really difficult. And there were several players who came in and were having such a hard time building trust at this critical moment in the game. They actually set up basically like an escrow account where they all put money in and told this neutral third party, like, you can't release the funds unless everyone lives up to their word. And it actually worked. It was like very interesting. Like, all of these people were like jumping in and like contributing crazy ideas, doing wacky stuff. It was really fun. We would have sort of the game master we called them Probst, because in honor of Jeff Probst from Survivor. And they would, have kind of the secret information in the game and would share with you what's going on, and that was kind of a high trust situation. People started making fake Jeff Probst accounts to go seed fake information to people and get them to like tell him important stuff back. And somebody eventually, at a really critical point in the game, made a whole video and made a fake account called Huge Info Dumps. And came in with like a vocoder and was like leaking information that like might have been true, might have been false, and it was extremely hilarious. The game was addictive. We had something really interesting on our hands, and this was Emmett, who was one of the guys who was with us early on, who helped to create it. And we started realizing that like when the game was heating up, he's like, dude, I spent way too many hours just like in Discord arguing with people and figuring out what our plan was. Like, we had something that was like really super exciting. A ton of people joined the server, and we had this Catacomian Games server all of a sudden where it was like, this isn't just our buddies, it's like our buddies' buddies and our buddies' buddies' buddies. And it was just a super exciting and fun time. We started hanging out in real life, and a lot of these people started getting together. It turned out a number of them lived in New York, and Daniel Colborn of Laravel fame is up there at the top. He came and visited, and like we went out for a dinner with like other people who played the game, because these were like real relationships that came to life. This community was instrumental in me shortly thereafter launching my first Kickstarter, which was this card game. And sorry, it sounded like someone was asking if I had copies of it with me. I do have copies of it with me. So if you would like to buy a copy, they're available here. It's just a lowly $30. It's really not much. But this community of people was like instrumental in launching this thing. When I eventually decided to launch a Kickstarter for this card game, I was like, well, now I've got 180 people in this server who are like a vested interest in us making games. How exciting is this? Okay, so just a couple of these people, again, these villagers who kind of showed up and threw their ingredients into the pot. This is Mary, who would not describe herself as a sort of hardcore gamer. She is an improv actor, she's a writer, she's really funny, but she's not really much of a gamer. She showed up, and it turned out that she had this unbelievable knack for this game and just started demolishing us. So much so that the game called Pecking Order, her friends made her a hat for being the Pecking Order champ. It turns out that she's a bit of a troll, too, and one of these real-life friendships blossomed where she and Emmett actually lived together for a while, and after she beat him in one game, she left that little message for him at the house. This was super interesting because it led us into this retro process. We had this extremely collaborative environment where we had lots and lots of people contributing ideas, some of which were really good, some of which were terrible, and we needed a kind of a way to systematically test them, try them out, and figure out what we were going to actually merge into the game. So after every single game, we would have this retro where we'd go through everything. As you can see, there were 106 real changes merged into the game. 36 we just kind of passed on, and 8 that we were testing, I guess, at the time that we eventually quit. But this gave us a huge amount of hours of practice of just going through with lots of stakeholders who disagreed, sometimes really passionately disagreed, and figuring out like, how do we find a compromise forward, which is usually like the answer was like, we'll just have to test it, which is how things work in real life, I think, a lot of the time as well. But it was this really interesting process that now I use all the time at work. I mean, I've always believed in retros, but now more than ever, I think retros are kind of the whole game. So this is a really critical part of it. And I just mentioned Mary because what it turned out was that like she would never have called herself a game designer before this, but she seemed to understand something about the game that we didn't understand. She had insight that we didn't have because she was kicking our butts. And so we were like, oh, I guess she really understands stuff that we don't understand. So it's really, really interesting to like bring her in and like bring her into the fold. And it was like, actually, Mary, you're like a pretty talented game designer, and it was really very interesting. A good friend of Mary's, Alyssa, who was also in there, another brilliant improv actor in New York. She's very funny. She is horrible at pecking order. She's really funny. She and Walter are both horrible. Walter, my friend, who kind of helped to design from the beginning, and we, memed them a lot because they were both so bad, and then they played together and just got completely destroyed. But when you play these games, you just talk to each other all week, and it's very fun. She said at one point to me, your friend Walter, he seems pretty cool. And I said, he's a bachelor. You should just slide into his DMs. What's the harm? You just played a game with him. Why not? And she responded with this. And a year later, or maybe a year and a half later, they were engaged to be married, and they're getting married in March. And I often think, if my entire game design journey leads to nothing else other than a marriage, like that's a home run. Like we're doing great. So it really just brought a lot of people together. This is Chris. Chris bought 5 copies of Colossi. Chris is smart because he bought 5 copies of Colossi. You can buy as many copies. There's not an upper limit on how many copies you can buy. Chris is an extremely good game tester and game designer. He wouldn't have thought of himself as a game designer at the beginning, but he's extremely good at testing. Chris showed up and helped me to build this spreadsheet. Keep in mind, 2020, I'm not a programmer. People say spreadsheets are programming, which they are, but like I was certainly not a web developer yet. So we build out the internal logic of this game in this crazy spreadsheet. He's like an actuary and like actually knows like really great sophisticated spreadsheet techniques. I was doing my best. We built this whole thing. I'm actually really proud of it. Like we had to do this thing where like everyone was submitting everything with Google Forms. But because we didn't have like unique player IDs, like we needed to give everyone a unique code so that like when the data showed up, we could parse like who is this and is it a real player? And this all fed into this giant spreadsheet that was doing like a huge amount of logic to like run the game. It was actually really cool. We got to reflect some of the data into these like read-only spreadsheets where there's like some public information and some private information in here, so that players could basically have like a makeshift dashboard. It was like definitely the coolest thing I've ever done in Google Sheets. But things got pretty ugly. So things, the deeper we tried to get into it, we just started writing these like ungodly queries. This is just like a thing to like show the scoreboard, and it's terrible. It's gibberish. And we started writing a bunch of like scripts to like comb through the data at regular intervals and doing all this stuff. It became unmanageable. And I eventually reached out to my friend Daniel Colborn and I said, we need help. I need your help to write better Google scripts. And he laughed and he said, I will not be helping you write better Google scripts, but I will help you become a Laravel developer because that is what you desperately want to be. So Daniel comes into the picture. Daniel is a very good Laravel developer, has been doing this for years. He's been telling me for years, you should be a web developer. And finally now I have a project in front of me that's like a big, hard project that's screaming out to be a web app. So we do Laravel new, and we start writing code. We get deep into it, and Daniel realizes, man, this thing should really be event sourced. Games are a perfect use case for event sourcing. Daniel was really into event sourcing. He had been using it a lot with his friend and former boss, Chris Morrell. And this is what they used, is the Spotsy package. You will not hear me say anything negative about the Spotsy package. We used it to build this entire game, and it was great. We love it. It's terrific. There's a lot of code you have to write to make this package work. And without getting all the way into it, like we would do stuff where it's like you would have like a ballot cast event, which then needs to be like recorded and applied in this trait over on the player aggregate, which aggregates events together. And we had to have all of our validation logic over there, and then you like record it, and then you persist it, and then you have a separate function where you apply it to the aggregate. But then you need to put it in the database, then in a separate file in the projector, you put it into the database over here. But then we need to reach into the score aggregate and then, reapply it and run these modifiers on it. And so this is like just like the code for someone to vote, basically. And part of this certainly could be like we overcomplicated things. Like this is not all the package's, responsibility. But the way that things were divided up, Daniel already had really strong opinions about event sourcing with Chris. His opinions got like lit on fire through this process because we were suddenly like deep in event land, running into like every problem you can possibly run into. And we're just getting like hundreds of hours writing event sourced code in this like super complex environment. Games are complex. They're very complex. So this eventually leads to Daniel building his own event sourcing package called Verbs. And that's Daniel and Chris together right before Laracon US. Daniel did the Laracon Grand Slam going around the world talking about verbs, being the Johnny Appleseed of event sourcing with Laravel. And it's like the crowning achievement of his career. It's like the coolest thing that he's done so far. I'm sure he will do cooler things in the future, but like as of right now, this thing that he and Chris built is like freaking awesome, and we use it all the time. And it might have happened without this game, but this game certainly like drastically accelerated that process of him forming those opinions and saying, we got to go build our own package. And now every game I build, I'm building with verbs. This is Grant. Grant's a really great designer. He showed up and started designing the game for us because now we had a web app, and he did some really beautiful stuff. He's our good friend, and he just was like, oh, I can do design. I do this all day at work. And he started making us really great stuff and buttons that we liked. And it was really fun, and the app had like a ton of personality. And there was just like, these cool dashboards and all these different advantages you could play that where, each one had like different select menus that popped down. There's a lot of like interesting technical problems, a lot of fun design problems. And, this activity feed and a timer showing you when the round ends and your balance of your wallet and all this different stuff. Grant did such a good job, and we enjoyed working with him so much that then when I went to go work on my card game, I was like, Grant, you should do all the graphic design for this card game. And he didn't do the art, but he did all the graphic design. And I love how the cards look in it. I was like so thrilled with it. So that relationship ended up also kind of carrying over into another project. This is Jacob. Sorry, wrong picture. Jacob and I have been friends since we were 13 years old, back when we were trying to make viral YouTube videos in 2006. You can look that up if you want. It's pretty great. This is Jacob now. Jacob is one of the best dudes ever, and he works with us at Thunk. He and I started just writing code, and we wrote a lot of code. And this was like basically the best way to learn to write code ever. We were both interested at the time, and what we would do is every Sunday night, Daniel would give us a task that was a little bit out of the range of what we thought we knew how to do. And he'd say, just go try it. Don't talk to me all week. I have to go do my job. But on next Sunday night, we'll do code review. And we just did this over and over for like probably a year and a half. And Jacob got really interested in front-end stuff. I got really interested in back-end stuff. And we just wrote code, and then Daniel would look at it and go, ha, that's a ridiculous way to write that, but nice, you made it work. Okay, let me show you how I'd write it, And I really think this is like the best, like doing that with a mentor who knows what he's doing is amazing. It's such a great way to learn to write code. Jacob also is an improv actor who's very funny, and he added quite a bit of personality to the game. He added in this chicken who taunts you throughout the game on all the different views. It was great. Obviously, this led to eventually Daniel says, hey, I've got so much inbound freelance work. There's a lot of good stuff going on. I have so much work that I'm turning it down. The three of us are a pretty good dev team now. Should we just start an agency? And that led to a new career for me. Some of this might sound really familiar because at Laracon US this year, we ran a game very similar to this called the Thunk Pyramid Scheme. And we gave away $1,500 to the winner, and it went really well for us. It led to getting 350 signups on our mailing list, and new clients came directly out of that. It was this really awesome marketing experience at Laracon, and it tied in with Daniel's talk. And again, when the moment at which we decided we should make a game that would be such a cool idea, it was the three of us had already spent this ridiculous amount of time building event-sourced social games for large groups of people in Laravel. So it was oh, no-brainer. We can do that, overnight. Okay, so we get to 2024. Getting games together got a lot harder. The momentum just kind of waned. And even the people who were most excited to play, myself included, just weren't as excited anymore. I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that it wasn't COVID anymore. We're out in the real world. We don't have to kind of sit at home playing a social game on our phone to keep ourselves busy anymore. We have other things going on. I think partly the novelty of the game wore off over time. I think the game also had problems. I could spend a whole talk talking about that, but there were these certain problems, this Kingmaker problem where there's 12 people in the game, and halfway through, half of them realize that they're not going to win, and so then they just decide, they either check out, which is a terrible experience, or they just decide who they do want to win, and then just go make a king. So it shifts from this strategy game to this popularity contest, and that felt bad to a lot of people, which we solved with Pyramid Scheme by with the money. It's oh, well, now you have a reason to work together instead of quitting. Anyway, there's a bunch of reasons why it's I have thoughts on why this was a very imperfect game. But stuff came up, life changed, and we just kind of slowed down. In September, we pulled the server down. This is a game that kind of never saw the light of day. We had grand plans for it. We thought, wow, this is a new kind of game. This could be really exciting and amazing. And what if people started playing these week-long social games that are cutthroat and crazy? And it just didn't really happen. And you have to also pick which projects you put real marketing effort and real distribution effort after. It's easy to make new games. It's easy to make new side projects, new SaaS products, but really going out there and saying, we're selling this thing. We want your money. This is good. We're sticking with this. We're going to support this for 10 years. That's a lot of effort. That's maybe even more effort than making the thing. And so you have to be really selective about what you do that with. And we decided we're not doing it with this one. And I think it was a good decision. It was very sad, but I think it was a good decision. So I'm left with these questions. Was that a huge waste of time? I think I spent, back of the envelope calculation for first coming up with this idea really in the middle of 2019 to building this spreadsheet, testing, retros, hours long of retros after every single game, building it in Laravel, learning to become a programmer, event sourcing, all this stuff. I think I spent about 1,200 hours on this game. Am I crazy? Was this a failure? What am I doing with my life? Why did I do this? So those questions crept in, and I felt sad, and I missed the game a lot, and I was what did we get out of this? And I came back to this idea of the stone soup. So just to recap, I showed up, Jacob and Daniel show up, we all, we build basically a team out of this. I get a new career out of it. I own a business now that is doing really well. Daniel builds verbs with Chris, which is this amazing achievement for him. Walter is there. Alyssa's there. Walter and Alyssa become Walter and Alyssa. Grant shows up. Chris shows up. This all makes Colossi possible. I'm able to launch this thing and make my first game come out in the world. The Thunk Pyramid Scheme happens. We get more customers. We're now like, oh, we're good at making social games that work really well at conferences. We'll probably do this again at the next LayerCon and come up with another cool idea. Mary shows up. All of these different friends. We have all this amazing stuff. And was this a failure where I shut down the server and there was nothing to show for it? Or did I just pull the stone out of the soup and say, let's eat? That's it.